Let's compare the 4 non-limited mages of Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail. If you already know you want to main a mage, then this might serve to help you choose, or alternatively teach you what you don't want. Or maybe you just want to hear about the pros and cons of each of these jobs combined with a bit of comedy, in which case you have also come to the right place. Please take note that this video of course includes my opinion at times, especially in some of the ratings shown for each job. So if you feel that I missed something or that you disagree, I would love to hear about it or about your favorite mage in the comments. Now then, let's start with the Black Mage, the classic fireball slinging fantasy wizard. The job incorporates ice for recovery, fire for burst, and thunder for damage over time, for some reason, to cover 3 elements, and perfectly demonstrates the common feature of mages that you have a lot of options, and even if you're casting plenty, you could just be casting the wrong thing. The Black Mage rotation at its most basic level spends all of its MP in fire, then jumps into ice for a short rest to recover it all in a flash, then back into fire, all the while maintaining their thunder dots on their targets. The standard rotation of Black Mage can be simplified all the way down to 3 to 4 Fire Force, Paradox, 2 to 3 Fire Force, Despair, Flare Star with an optional Fire Starter somewhere in there, followed by Blizzard 3, Blizzard 4, and Paradox with Thunder cast once or twice somewhere in there, and then starting again with Fire 3. However, even the standard rotation of Black Mage introduces so-called non-standard lines and tricks, as that guaranteed fire starter is often better spent by using Transpose after the Ice Paradox and then using Fire 3 to start off Astral Fire with a bang. Due to Black Mage's long cast times, a core part of the rotation, in general, is also about planning your movement around the time so you have the option to move, whether that's when you're casting Paradox or Thunder anyway, by spending your polyglots on Xenoglossy while repositioning, or using swift casts, triple casts, or fire starter procs when you have to get going. Slide casting as well is a much bigger feature for Black Mages than any other mage due to how little the job can move on command. Black Mage's burst is very different from many other jobs, as while ley lines represents an uptick in damage, for the most part, it doesn't change the fact that Black Mage is a lot about a very high average attack potency, and bursting is sometimes more about fitting as many of the good attacks and buffs than fitting something specific there, although there is always an optimal sequence of course, with the maximum possible damage in a 20-second buff window including up to 5 Xenoglossies, a Thunder application, Despair, Flare Star, and however many Fire Force can fit after that. On that note, optimizing Black Mage is, at a baseline, about making the most of every cast of ley lines, using Amplify and Mana Font effectively as close on cooldown as possible, and, if possible, getting value out of Swift Cast on cooldown, making the most of triple casts and bursts, in case they're not needed for movement, and of course, shoving as many Xenoglossies into burst windows as possible. Due to the GCD-centric nature of the Black Mage rotation, a challenge of the rotation is to actually be in the right place in your rotation when raid buffs come out in the first place. And so, a huge part of optimizing Black Mage is both about keeping up the attack as much as possible while having to move around, while conserving as many movement options as possible, as ironically, they are also your burst. And while doing all of that, sometimes using non-standard lines to micro-adjust the rotation so that you end up at the right spot when raid buffs come out. Another part of optimizing Black Mage is that, as a result of how its rotation functions, it uniquely benefits a lot more from spell speed than other mages. However, how much speed you have opens some doors and closes others, in terms of what kinds of non-standard strategies can function. More speed means you finish casts more often, leading to more slide casting, while less speed means any instant casts you do have amount to more movement. Similarly, less speed means tricks involving Transpose can be easier to perform, whereas more speed makes the Astral Fire timer a lot more lenient, so Black Mage optimization can sometimes be a lot about figuring out how you need to tune it to your preference. Defensively, Black Mage has Mana Ward for a reasonably large shield and Ethereal Manipulation for extremely consistent repositioning in a party. During bursts, Between the Lines can also be added into the mix for even more mobility. On top of that, Black Mage, of course, also has all the role actions like all mages, with Adel in particular standing out as an actual proper defensive cooldown reducing damage. Black Mage's biggest selling point is almost certainly its incredibly freeform rotation that enables some of the craziest kinds of experimentation to figure out what is actually best. leading to discoveries like the Transpose Flare AoE rotation that sort of skips over Fire 2 and Blizzard 2 entirely. The fact Black Mage is the one job with the greatest interest in speed can also be a big factor, not to mention that Black Mage is effectively the only mage without a raid buff, making it more self-centered in its performance. Up next, we bring forth the Summoner, almost the polar opposite of Black Mage in certain ways, being the most freely mobile among the mages and with very little wiggle room in its rotation beyond the obvious like which order you summon things in. Summoner's rotation at its basic level is simply summoning your big summon, sometimes called the Demi-Primal, making the most of it, followed by summoning each of the 3 elemental primals, with the order often being dictated either by what does the most damage for buffs, or by how the fight plays out, so the less mobile parts can get coordinated for the parts where this is not an issue. To put this into slightly more detail, what this really means is that the primary point where Summoner's rotation varies is when Ifrit is summoned, as it uniquely both has a few long casts and a melee section, which is in strong contrast to Titan that has only instant attacks, and Garuda that has one cast that can be circumvented with Swift Cast if required. Summoner's Burst, probably unsurprising, is dictated by Solar Bahamut and Searing Light, the Summoner raid buff, and boils down to 2 Necrotizes, Energy Drain, 2 Necrotizes, Sunflare, Exodus, Searing Flash, 6 Umbral Impulses, as well as, typically, a Titan summon and 2 Topaz Rides and Mountain Busters, as it is the most consistently effective option. By design, the only way summoners can really optimize around this is to make sure the Demi-Primal comes out on time every time, and that the odd-minute energy drain is used on time, and the necrotizers are saved. The only other thing summoners can do to optimize their burst is that fitting 6 Umbral Impulses before Solar Bahamut leaves requires a GCD of 2.48 or less, sometimes depending on latency or frame rate. And once that is attained, the only remaining optimizations are related to Garuda and Ifrit, primarily outside of bursts. For Ifrit, it is simply about using the summon at a time where it is safe to cast Ruby Rite and the Crimson combo. For Garuda, Slipstream leaves a field that does damage for a bit after the fact, so summoning Garuda at a time where the target will stay inside the circle is always better. Summoner also has some rather strange optimizations compared to the other mages in regards to lower level content. At level 70, notably for ultimates, summoners are capable of reaching so much speed that they can easily fit 7 Astral Impulses inside Demi-Bahamut. And due to the rest of the summon rotation being a bit lacking, this is a lot more impressive in that level range. If we go even further down, Summoner's auto-attack is a significant damage difference and is what makes Topaz Ruin and at times Emerald Ruin worth using aside from them being instant. Defensively, Summoner has very regular access to Radiant Aegis for Barrier with up to 2 charges, and every Solar Bahamut offers Lux Solaris for raid-wide heal. Every 4th Demi-Primal, Phoenix, also grants a raid-wide heal over time, as well as access to Rekindle, which is a surprisingly strong single-target healing option. Summoner also is one of the mages that have access to Arrays. Finally, while Summoner has Physic, by around level 50, it might as well not exist, as it scales with mind rather than intelligence, and quickly falls behind in power. By level 100, it heals for less than 1% of your max HP. The biggest selling point of Summoner is the incredible simplicity of the rotation. By many, it is considered the easiest job in the game. However, initially picking up the job can be a challenge considering that it has some of the biggest and simultaneously confusing tooltips in the game. Another big selling point is the fact that Scholar shares level with Summoner, enabling you to level 2 jobs at once. But that doesn't really sell Summoner as a main necessarily. Next, coming in from France, we have Red Mage, representing a kind of Spellblade job, alternating between long-range magic and close-range attacks on occasion. It is also the only job among the mages that, by level 90, still has any randomness in its rotation. And combined with its other unique properties, both makes it somewhat forgiving when initially picked up, and yet incredibly difficult to master. Red Mage's rotation at its basic level involves building black and white mana, reacting to procs, while making your best effort to use Flesh and Contra Sixt, exactly on cooldown. Options like Acceleration and Swiftcast give you ways to skip a beat, so to speak, in the 5-second pairwise casts induced by Dualcast, to make sure that Flesh and Contra Sixt go out on time, even if they are off beat. This consistently, combined with some reliance on the instant cast to maintain the rotation, can make Red Mage feel less mobile than even Black Mage at times. This is even further underlined by the fact that the melee combo, which comes up around 3 times in a 2-minute loop, is the most mobile part of the Red Mage rotation, while of course also being the peak of its damage output. Red Mage's burst is dictated mainly by Embolden, their raid buff, and usually involves at least one full melee combo, but if possible, can sometimes include 2. And due to the length of a melee combo, this can get a bit slanted, where the first combo must already be underway as Embolden and other raid buffs go out, to make sure that the latter part of both melee combos land inside buffs. This can get even more confusing as, similar to Black Mage's mana font, Manification also has a cooldown shorter than 2 minutes, meaning that over the course of a fight, optimally, it might slowly drift away from Embolden. This means that to get 2 melee combos in the burst, you may actually have to legitimately have most of the resources for both melee combos. This does indeed mean that sometimes, to optimize Red Mage, simply is to use the various cooldowns on cooldown, and making the most of every melee combo. The hardest part here is, again, a bit comparable to Black Mage, where you might want to save melee combos for bursts if you can, but sometimes you just can't. And getting more modifications sooner is better than getting optimal modifications. And finally, where I said if you can for swift casting on cooldown for Black Mage, outside of an active melee combo, swift cast is always a gain of some sort for Red Mage, as it enables you to skip straight to the Thunder or the Arrow. And, while doing so, Flesh and Contra Sixt still need to go out as close to exactly on cooldown as possible. On paper, it is very simple. You get 3 melee combos in 2 minutes, every melee combo is about 5 regular GZDs long, putting you offbeat with Flesh and Contra Sixt, but you also get 3 swift casts per 2 minutes, allowing you to exactly get back on track. In practice, this is not that simple, however. Finally, in regards to optimization, due to Flesh and Contra Sixt being so strict, Red Mages tend to hate spell speed more than any other mage. In terms of defense, Red Mage has both Core and Déplacement for repositioning, and Magic Barrier as a raid-wide magic damage reduction option that also increases healing received, although it is only 10 seconds, so it is rather specific. Red Mage also has Cure, which actually heals for a decent amount, which can also be used to initiate dual cast without a target. And finally, Red Mage has Raise, similar to Summoner, enabling Red Mage access to Raise. However, unlike Summoner, as dual cast also works to make it instant, Red Mage uniquely has the capacity as the only job to instant raise players back to back in normal content, which sometimes gives it the nickname Res Mage. For a significant amount of players, the biggest selling point of Red Mage is simply the utility of Raise and Cure. For many others, it is the fantasy of a Spellblade, mixing melee and magic. For yet others, the sort of simplicity of Red Mage's rotation, without being too simple like Summoners, draws them in. However, Red Mage has a tendency to be a bit surprising with how deep it gets once you try to master it. And finally, smudging in on the Dawntrail, we have Pictomancer. Simultaneously, perhaps, both the goofiest job in Final Fantasy XIV, but also the burstiest of them all. Throwing paint and drawing up fantastical creations as its attacks, it might just do exactly what you had imagined it would. Pictomancer's rotation revolves around making the most of the 3 motifs, and then the filler combos and subtractive palette makes up the filler. In a strange twist, where Black Mage has some long cast times that can be circumvented by skipping them, all cast times for Pictomancer are always shorter than the GZD induced by each spell, meaning that, for example, swift casting a motif means that you get 4 seconds to run in, rather than saving a second and a half. This, combined with Smudge and the readily available instant attacks in the form of Hammer, Stamp, and Combat in Black, often makes Pictomancer stand as a more mobile mage than Black Mage, and sometimes even more than Red Mage. As each motif takes a while to cast, and does not even require a target, a big part of the rotation is also simply about finding the best time to do that. Pictomancer's 3 motifs and parts of Subtractive Palette all feature as part of its burst, which is dictated by Starry Muse, its raid buff, which comes up every 2 minutes. Starry Muse itself is like a bigger ley lines field that the Pictomancer has to be in for certain attacks. By comparison, Black Mage can move their ley lines once, but have to stay in it pretty much all the time. The Pictomancer burst, outside of its opener, involves 3 Hammer Stamp combo steps, either Retribution of the Madine or Mark of the Ages, 1 Living Muse, Comet in Black, 2 Subtractive Palette combo steps, although optimally Stone and Thunder, another Comet in Black, Star Prism, and Rainbow Drip. Not necessarily in that order. This means that outside of this burst, Pictomancer has 2 extra Living Muses and 1 extra Striking Muse to work with, and a significant part will simply be filler combos. In terms of optimization, Pictomancer is a lot about thinking ahead. Often, the setup, if any, for getting exactly Stone and Thunder inside the burst and not Blizzard may need to be performed a while in advance. While you can just paint your motifs whenever possible, knowing when is the best time typically requires you to know the fight very well beforehand. Does it have times where the boss is untargetable anyway? Are there times where you might want to swift cast a motif for mobility reasons? Are there times where it would specifically be unwise to start painting as you might suddenly have to move? And as a fight is drawing to a close, sitting with an already painted Starry Muse that won't come up means you effectively wasted 4 seconds. This also applies to Striking Muse and Living Muse, of course. And finally, there is Holy in White. Yes, it is a mobility option. Yes, it does more damage than the regular filler combo. But it does less damage than the Subtractive Palette combo and Comet in Black. And it uses a GCD on not doing that. This means that optimizing Pictomancer can be about using as few Holy in Whites as possible, with one really weird exception. You need to use Water and Blue twice to even reach another Subtractive Palette, and it takes about 5 GCD's time or so to spend Subtractive Palette. So, depending on when the fight will end, using a certain number of Holy in White casts can be considered optimal, and any more than that is bad. In regards to spell speed, Pictomancer really does not care. By that I mean, it doesn't really help the Pictomancer do anything much, so actively taking speed doesn't do much. Pictomancer has such a big emphasis on burst, and that burst doesn't benefit from speed. On the other hand, unlike Red Mage, and in small part Summoner, it's not like Pictomancer really is hurt that much by having some speed. The one exception is that having speed can change how the filler combo aligns, meaning the plan is different to make sure Stone and Thunder lands in the burst. For defense, Pictomancer has Smudge as one of the best mobility options in the game. It also has Tempera Coat for a big barrier on the Pictomancer, and if not needed, or it doesn't break, it can swap it for Tempera Grasa, a raid-wide but smaller shield, granting it some flexibility. The sheer force of Pictomancer's burst is a selling point for many. The flexibility offered by the motifs is also a huge selling point, as it makes Pictomancer often not just resistant to the annoyance other jobs have with downtime in fights, but Pictomancer outright thrives in it. The goofiness of the job can also be a big selling point, of course, or like a breaking point for others. To round up this comparison, of course, every mage brings something unique to the table. Summoner is both the simplest of the 4 to play and offers the most middle-of-the-road experience, offering decent healing options, a raid buff, decent burst, and a raise. Red Mage emphasizes utility even harder than Summoner and pays for it by being significantly more complex and harder to maneuver, but it also provides a more fluid and flexible rotation as a result of having options. Black Mage goes in the exact opposite direction, essentially offering no utility whatsoever beyond protecting itself once in a while, but also provides the most self-concentrated and consistent damage of the 4, while also having one of the most experimental and complex rotations available. Pictomancer offers not nearly as much utility as Red Mage or Summoner, but is like a polar opposite to Black Mage, where Black Mage is almost always doing a lot of damage with very short dips. Pictomancer spikes even higher, but accompanies that with periods of doing no damage. For a new player, Summoner would by far be the easiest mage to pick up once you get past the confusion of its various strange tooltips. However, Summoner is so much simpler than the other mages that it might not be a good pick for understanding the mage role itself very well, where Black Mage is a better choice, but might be a much harder starting choice. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, before Dawntrail, Black Mage's most optimized rotation, known as non-standard Black Mage, revolved around avoiding casting Blizzard spells as much as possible, going as far as to pretty much never casting Blizzard 4, and sometimes avoiding casting Blizzard 3 if given the choice. This was possible at the time as Umbral Ice granted the Black Mage a massive increase to their passive MP recovery, rather than causing ice magic to recover MP, so simply hanging out in Umbral Ice was good enough.